This is a repeat of what I already reworded in my previous response. Document 64 covers the same content with the last sentence added. Here's the continuation with that final piece included, in the same reworded style. He will never tell you this. He does not even know it himself. But there is one thing you can do starting today that makes an avoidant man fall so deeply in love with you that he starts scaring himself with how much he needs you. And no, it is not being more patient. It is not giving him more space. It is not waiting quietly while he figures out his feelings. That is what every other woman does, and that is exactly why it does not work. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I am about to show you is the opposite of everything you have been told about loving an avoidant man. And by the end, you will understand exactly why he pulls away from women who try so hard and why he falls apart for the one woman who stops trying at all. If you have ever loved a man who runs the moment things get close, who goes cold right when it starts to feel real, who makes you feel like you are somehow too much just for wanting consistency, this is for you, because there is a very specific shift a woman can make, not in him but in herself, that flips the entire dynamic. And when it happens, it does not happen slowly. It happens like a switch. One day he is distant, foggy, unreadable, and then something changes in you, and suddenly he cannot stop thinking about you. Let me explain why this works, because once you understand the psychology behind it, you will never chase an avoidant man again. Avoidant attachment does not come from a man not caring. It comes from a man caring too much too fast in a nervous system that was never taught how to hold that feeling safely. Somewhere in his life, closeness got tangled up with danger. Maybe a parent who was warm one moment and distant the next. Maybe a household where needing someone meant eventually losing them. Maybe an earlier relationship where love turned into control or disappointment or a slow erosion of who he was. Whatever the origin, his brain learned one lesson and never unlearned it. Love is unsafe when it gets too close. So when a woman starts to matter to him, something strange happens inside him. Instead of moving toward the feeling, his body treats it like a threat. His heart says stay, his nervous system says run. And most women have no idea this war is even happening, because from the outside, all they see is a man pulling away right when things were going well. Here's where it gets interesting. Most women respond to that pulling away with more effort, more texts, more reassurance, more trying to prove they're safe, trustworthy, worth staying for. And I understand why. It feels like love. It feels like fighting for the relationship. But to an avoidant man's nervous system, it feels like the walls closing in. Every extra text is one more signal that says you need something from him. And need, to a man whose alarm system is already ringing, feels like pressure. Pressure makes him retreat further, and the woman, confused and hurt, pushes a little harder, and the cycle repeats until she's exhausted and he's gone. Now here's the shift that changes everything. It's not a trick. It's not a manipulation tactic. It's something far more powerful because it's real. When a woman stops performing safety and starts actually living it from the inside out, everything changes. I have watched this pattern play out so many times in so many different relationships that I could almost predict the timeline before it happens. A woman meets a man. There's chemistry, connection, momentum. Things move fast, maybe faster than either of them expected. And then, right around the point where most relationships would deepen, he goes quiet. Not cruel, not dismissive, just quiet. Slower replies, shorter conversations, a strange new distance where warmth used to be. And the woman, understandably, panics a little. She starts wondering what changed. She starts wondering if she said too much, felt too much, showed too much. And that panic, that very human panic, is exactly what keeps the cycle going, because it pushes her straight into the one behavior that makes an avoidant man retreat even further: pursuit. What does it actually look like when a woman finally breaks the pattern? It looks like a woman who, instead of shrinking her life around his availability, keeps building her own. She still has her mornings. She still sees her friends. She still chases the things that light her up. Whether he's texting back quickly or not, she is not doing this to make him jealous. She's doing it because her life was never supposed to revolve around waiting for a man to feel ready. And here's the part almost nobody tells you. That energy is not cold. It's not indifference. It's not the fake, performative disinterest some people teach, where you pretend not to care while secretly refreshing your phone every 5 minutes. He can feel that fakeness immediately, and it repels him just as much as neediness does, because it's still built around him. What actually disarms an avoidant man is a woman whose calm is real, a woman who is not braced for his next move, a woman who has already decided that her worth does not fluctuate with his texting habits. Think about what that does to his nervous system. His entire pattern is built on an old, buried belief that closeness eventually demands something from him he cannot give, or gets taken away the moment he lets his guard down. So he tests. Without even realizing he's testing, he pulls back to see what happens. Most women flinch. They chase. They confirm his fear that love always comes with a leash, but a woman who stays warm, stays open, and simply continues living her full life without collapsing into anxiety, she breaks the pattern. She proves, without a single argument or explanation, that love does not have to be a trap. And this is the moment something shifts in him that he cannot explain, even to himself. He starts to notice her, not in a performative way, the way he might chase someone new and exciting, in a deeper, quieter way. He starts to wonder why she's not chasing him. He starts to notice that she's not waiting by the phone. He starts to feel, for the first time in a long time, a strange and unfamiliar sensation, curiosity, then longing. Then, if she keeps this up long enough without abandoning herself in the process, something that terrifies him more than anything else, attachment. Because here's the truth about avoidant men that almost nobody says out loud. They do not fall in love with women who convince them to stay. They fall in love with women who never needed them to. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it changes how you see this entire dynamic. You are not trying to convince him you're worth loving. You already know that. What you're doing is simply refusing to shrink yourself, waiting for him to catch up to what you already know. Okay, let's talk about what this actually looks like in real life, because understanding the psychology is one thing, but living it is another. There are 5 specific behaviors I've noticed in every woman who successfully draws an avoidant man out of his shell instead of pushing him further into it, and I want to walk you through each one. The first thing this woman does differently is she stops interpreting his distance as a referendum on her worth. This is the biggest internal shift, and it has to happen first, because everything else is built on top of it. When he goes quiet, she does not spiral into, "What did I do wrong?" She does not replay the last conversation looking for the mistake. She understands on a real level that his distance is coming from his own nervous system, his own history, his own unresolved fear, and not from some flaw in her that needs fixing. This single shift in interpretation changes her entire behavior, because you cannot chase someone if you do not believe you did something wrong that needs correcting. The second thing she does is keep her identity fully intact. This sounds simple, but almost no one does it once real feelings are involved. She does not put her hobbies on hold. She does not cancel plans hoping he'll finally text. She does not let the relationship become the main character of her life while everything else fades into background. And this is not a strategy to make him chase her, even though it often has that effect. It's simply the truth of a woman who has built a life she does not want to abandon for anyone, including him. Ironically, this is the exact quality that makes her irreplaceable in his mind, because he starts to sense that if he does not show up fully, she's not going to sit around waiting for him to decide. The third thing, and this is the one that catches most avoidant men completely off guard, is that she communicates directly instead of testing indirectly. Most people, when they feel insecure in a relationship, start speaking in hints, sighing instead of saying what's wrong, going cold instead of naming the hurt, posting something vague instead of texting the actual person. An avoidant man's nervous system is already on high alert for hidden threats, so indirect communication feels like a minefield to him because he cannot see what's coming. A woman who says exactly what she means, calmly and without accusation, becomes one of the only safe people in his life, because with her, he doesn't have to guess. Let me give you an example of what that sounds like, because the tone matters just as much as the words. Instead of going silent for 3 days after he cancels plans, she might simply say, "Hey, I noticed you've been a little distant this week." Directness is everything. No accusation, no guilt, no ultimatum hidden inside a question. Just an honest, open door. And here's the thing about avoidant men. When they're met with calm honesty instead of panic or punishment, something in them exhales, because for the first time, maybe in years, they're not being punished for having feelings that scare them. The fourth thing this woman does is let him come back on his own timeline without narrating his return. When an avoidant man pulls away and then re-emerges, which he almost always does if the relationship has real value to him, most women make the mistake of interrogating the absence. Where were you? Why did you go quiet? Are we okay? And every single one of those questions, even when they come from a completely valid place, reads to his nervous system as a test he already failed. A woman who understands this dynamic simply meets him where he is when he comes back. Warm, present, not performing forgiveness, not performing hurt, just present. And that consistency, more than any conversation about the relationship, is what slowly teaches his nervous system that closeness does not have to end in conflict. The fifth thing, and honestly the one that takes the longest to master, is that she regulates her own nervous system instead of asking him to regulate it for her. This does not mean suppressing her feelings. It means she has other outlets, other people, other tools, so that his silence does not become the only thing standing between her and feeling okay. Maybe that's a friend she calls when the anxiety spikes. Maybe it's a walk, a journal, a workout, a moment of prayer or stillness. Whatever it is, she has built something that does not depend on his response time. And this, more than anything else on this list, is what makes her calm sustainable instead of performative, because real regulation cannot be faked for long. Before I move on, I want to give you the mistake side of this too, because knowing what to avoid is just as important as knowing what to do. The first mistake is treating silence like a problem you have to fix immediately. When he goes quiet, the anxious instinct is to solve it, to send the perfect message that brings him back right now. But healthy relationships are not solved in a single text. They unfold in patience. The second mistake is over-explaining yourself. When women feel insecure, they tend to over-communicate, sending paragraph after paragraph trying to make sure he understands exactly how they feel. To an avoidant man, this can feel like being handed a test he did not study for. Say what you need to say once, clearly and calmly, and then let it land. The third mistake is keeping score, counting who texted first, who apologized last, who initiated the last 3 conversations. Scorekeeping turns love into a competition, and competition is the opposite of safety. The fourth mistake, and maybe the most common one, is announcing your growth. Telling him, look how calm I'm being right now, or I'm not going to chase you this time. The moment you announce the strategy, it stops being real, and he can feel that shift instantly. Real security does not need to be narrated, it simply is. Now, let's talk about what it actually looks like when this is working, because I don't want you sitting there wondering if any of this is making a difference. The signs are subtle at first, and if you're not paying attention, you might miss them. He starts reaching out first, even about small, unimportant things. He starts telling you more about his day without you asking. He starts using language about the future, even in small ways, mentioning a trip, an event, a plan, and including you in it without being prompted. He becomes more physically present, sitting closer, initiating touch, making eye contact that lingers a little longer than it used to. None of these show up all at once. They arrive slowly, almost shyly, like a man testing whether it's actually safe to want something out loud. Your job in that moment is not to celebrate loudly or point out the change. Your job is to simply receive it warmly, without making it a big moment that puts pressure back on him. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds like I'm supposed to just accept being ignored and act like everything's fine. That is not what I'm saying, and this is a critical distinction, so listen closely. There is a massive difference between tolerating disrespect and refusing to abandon your own peace over someone else's fear. If a man is consistently unkind, dismissive, or cruel, that is not avoidant attachment. That's just poor treatment, and no attachment style excuses it. What we're talking about here is something different, a man who is genuinely capable of love, who has real feelings for you, but whose nervous system short-circuits the moment those feelings get too intense. There's a difference between a man protecting his heart out of old wounds and a man who simply doesn't value you. And knowing that difference is what separates a woman who is patiently allowing love to unfold at a safe pace from a woman who is quietly settling for scraps. This is exactly why the internal work matters so much more than any external tactic. If you try to fake this calm energy while secretly checking his location or refreshing his messages every 10 minutes, he will feel the gap between what you're performing and what you're actually feeling. Avoidant men are, ironically, some of the most sensitive people to incongruence because their entire nervous system has been trained to scan for danger in emotional signals. He can sense forced calm the same way he senses forced closeness. The only version of this that works is the real one. So how do you actually build that real calm, especially if right now you're anything but calm about this situation? Start small. Notice the moment you feel the urge to check his phone activity or reread old text looking for clues or draft a message you're not sure you should send. In that moment, don't judge yourself for feeling anxious. That's a completely human response to uncertainty. But instead of acting on the urge immediately, pause. Ask yourself, if I already knew deep down that I'm someone worth loving, would I still send this? Often the answer is no. Not because the feeling disappears, but because you remember that your worth isn't actually on trial here. His capacity to show up is. This is where so many women get stuck, because they confuse his avoidance with their own value. They think if he really loved me, he wouldn't need space, he wouldn't go quiet, he wouldn't need time to process. But that thinking comes from a very human place, wanting proof that you matter enough to override someone else's fear. The problem is, avoidance is not proportional to love. Some of the most avoidant men fall the hardest precisely because the intensity of what they feel is what scares them in the first place. His retreating is not a measurement of how much he loves you. It's a measurement of how unfamiliar it feels to be loved without conditions attached. I think about a story a woman once shared with me about a man she'd been seeing for a few months who would disappear for days at a time whenever things started to feel serious. Her first instinct, like most of ours, was to chase the silence, to send one more message, to ask one more time if everything was okay, but somewhere in that cycle, exhausted, she made a different choice. She stopped narrating his absence and started living her life fully in the space he left behind. She didn't do it perfectly. There were nights she still stared at her phone, but she kept showing up for her own life anyway. And slowly, without a single confrontation, without a single ultimatum, he started showing up more. Not because she performed indifference, but because she stopped needing his presence to feel like herself. Let's talk about what happens on the other side of this, because I don't want you thinking this is just about surviving his distance forever. When a woman consistently shows this grounded, self-respecting, emotionally honest presence over time, something remarkable happens in an avoidant man. His nervous system starts to recalibrate, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. He starts to notice that every time he pulls back, she doesn't disappear, but she also doesn't chase. He starts to notice that when he does come closer, she doesn't punish him for the distance. He starts to notice that being around her doesn't trigger the same tightness in his chest that closeness used to trigger with other people. And this is the part most women never get to see because they give up right before it happens. An avoidant man who feels safe enough to stop running doesn't just calm down. He becomes intensely devoted because underneath the walls, avoidant men are often some of the deepest feelers you'll ever meet. That's actually part of why they built the walls in the first place. Their feelings were too big, too overwhelming, and nobody ever taught them how to hold that intensity without losing themselves. When they finally find someone who doesn't flinch, who doesn't chase, who doesn't punish, all that suppressed depth of feeling comes rushing toward her instead of away from her. This is why, when an avoidant man truly falls, he doesn't fall halfway. He falls completely, sometimes almost overnight, because years of unexpressed longing finally have somewhere safe to go. Women who've experienced this describe it as a switch flipping. One week he's vague about the future. The next, he's the one bringing up plans, initiating conversations about where this is going, showing up in ways he never did before. It's not because she tricked him into it. It's because she stopped blocking the natural process with anxious pursuit and let his own nervous system arrive at the truth on its own timeline. Love, once it feels safe, doesn't need to be forced. It moves on its own. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think you deserve the full picture, not just the hopeful version. This process is not instant, and it's not guaranteed to work with every single man, because some men aren't just avoidant. They're simply unavailable in a permanent way, whether from circumstance, from character, or from a complete unwillingness to do their own work. No amount of calm, secure energy from you can fix a man who has no interest in becoming a safe partner. What this approach does is remove your own anxious behavior from sabotaging a genuine connection with a man who does have the capacity to love you well once his fear settles. It also, just as importantly, protects you, because a woman who isn't defined by whether a man texts back is a woman who can walk away from something that truly isn't working without losing herself in the process. I also want to touch on something that rarely gets talked about, which is how this dynamic plays out differently depending on how long the avoidance has been running in his life. A man who developed these patterns in childhood through inconsistent caregiving or emotional neglect often has a deeper, more automatic version of this fear response. His walls didn't form because of one relationship. They formed over years, sometimes decades, before you ever met him. That doesn't mean he can't change. It simply means the timeline may look different than a man whose avoidance was shaped mostly by one painful past relationship. Understanding this can help you release the pressure of expecting quick results, because you're not just competing with his last girlfriend. In many cases, you're gently working against a lifetime of learned self-protection, one calm, consistent interaction at a time. There's also a timeline question I get asked constantly, and I want to address it honestly instead of giving you a fantasy answer. This shift does not happen in a single conversation, and it rarely happens in a single week. For some men, the walls start coming down within a few weeks of consistent, grounded presence. For others, especially those with deeper wounds around abandonment or control, it can take months of steady, undramatic consistency before real change shows up. The mistake most women make is measuring progress day by day, checking to see if today he seemed warmer than yesterday. That kind of tracking keeps you anxious and keeps his walls up, because he can feel the scrutiny even when you don't say a word. Progress with an avoidant man is almost never linear. It looks like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, over and over, until one day you look back and realize the whole dynamic has quietly changed. That's actually the most powerful part of this whole shift, and I want you to really hear this. This is not a technique you perform to win a man. It's a way of living that happens to also be the thing that heals avoidant attachment in the people around you, because you stop being a mirror for their fear and start being an example of what safety actually feels like. Whether he steps into that safety or not is ultimately his choice, not your responsibility. But when a woman shows up this way consistently, real, warm, grounded, unwilling to abandon herself, she gives every relationship in her life, not just the romantic ones, the best possible chance to become something secure. So if you're in this right now, loving a man who runs hot and cold, who disappears when things get close, who makes you feel like loving him is a constant guessing game, I want you to remember this. You do not need to become smaller, quieter, more agreeable, or more patient to be loved well. You need to become steadier, steady in your own life, steady in your own worth, steady enough that his fear doesn't become your emergency. Because here's what nobody tells women who love avoidant men. You were never the problem he needed to solve. You are the safety he's been looking for his entire life, whether he knows it yet or not. And the woman who understands that, who lives that, is the one he eventually cannot walk away from, no matter how hard his fear tries to make him run. One last thing before we close, because I think it matters more than anything else I've said today. None of this works if you're using it as a performance to manipulate a specific outcome from a specific man. It works because it's true. It works because a woman who isn't defined by someone else's fear is simply a healthier, freer, more magnetic version of herself, regardless of who ends up standing beside her. If he steps into that safety, wonderful, you get to build something rare with him. If he doesn't, you've still built a version of yourself that will never again mistake anxiety for love, or silence for rejection, or distance for proof that you're not enough. That version of you is the real prize here, not any particular man's timeline for figuring himself out.